Bonjour à toutes et tous. Donc, on va devoir rester près de l'ordinateur pour parler. Et puis, ceux qui sont à distance, ben, voilà, ils n'auront pas vos questions, mais c'est pas grave. Petit problème technique. Alors, je voulais vous présenter Sophie Viseur, qui est une membre de notre laboratoire, qui est ingénieure de recherche au CEREGE, qui a son bureau, on va dire, principal à Saint-Charles, mais elle a aussi un bureau ici au troisième étage avec Anne, donc elle partage son temps entre les deux. Donc Sophie, que je remercie beaucoup, beaucoup de se prêter à cet exercice de faire cette présentation voilà, en face des collègues. Pour nous, c'est important au niveau des grands séminaires que voilà, qu'on mixe un peu, hein, comme on l'avait dit. Donc Sophie, elle dirige une des quatre équipes du CEREGE, donc l'équipe RICA avec François Fournier. Et puis, c'est vraiment notre référente hein, pour tout ce qui est aspect numérique, informatique et en particulier machine learning, modélisation. Donc là, sur le nouveau pôle modélisation, voilà, elle est co-responsable d'une plateforme avec Ghislain Gassier sur tout ce qui est traitement des données et aspects statistiques. Sophie, c'est quelqu'un qui est très engagé aussi sur les aspects formation, puisque voilà, elle est ingénieure de recherche à MU, mais elle fait elle est très impliquée dans les aspects formation, licence, master STPE et master sciences de l'eau. Elle accueille énormément d'étudiants stagiaires voilà, sur ces aspects-là, pas que de notre université, puisqu'elle est, de par sa formation, aussi beaucoup en lien avec l'école de l'ENSG de Nancy, puisque Sophie a fait sa thèse à l'INPL, l'Institut national de Polytechnique de Lorraine. Voilà, et elle a cette particularité d'avoir cette double casquette, double compétence, à la fois géologue et à la fois mathématicienne, informaticienne, voilà, qui est très précieux vu les temps voilà, à venir. Et voilà, donc on la sollicite énormément pour participer à nos projets de recherche. Donc voilà, donc je la remercie encore plus du coup d'avoir pris le temps de préparer ce PowerPoint sur ses recherches. Sophie, elle a aussi coordonné un projet sur des aspects formation et réalité virtuelle qui s'appelait Virtual Field avec VR2 Planet, donc pour faire des affleurements et du terrain ici en salle. Voilà, et donc à chaque fois qu'on accueille des stagiaires ou la fête de la science, voilà, on essaye de mettre en place ces ateliers. Voilà. Puis si tu veux compléter, je te laisse compléter quand tu. Voilà. Présente. Ok. Eh bien, je te laisse la parole. Et puis encore merci. Et puis, voilà.
De rien. Alors, je me suis entraînée à parler en anglais. Je me suis entraînée. Donc, je me suis mis dans la tête, on va dire, que j'allais parler en anglais. Donc, je vais peut-être le faire. Je ne sais pas si ce qui était prévu, parce que je vois qu'on parle français. En fait, d'un seul coup, j'ai réalisé. Bon, je vais peut-être parler anglais quand même. English or French? English? Oui, oui, je peux. Pas de problème, je peux pratiquer. Just also, we had an issue with the microphone, and so I cannot move, but I'm used to move. So I'm sorry. I hope it will not be difficult for you to hear me because I'm very used to, to go to slides and to move, and so I hope I will be able to stay here. Tell me if I move too much. So, good morning. I'm pleased to be there, and I will present you my works on extracting geological features beyond human perception, practical limits, and scalability from digital outcrop models. And even if I'm the only name on this picture, this works is made by many people, by colleagues and students that I will present at the end of this presentation, because I just put my name because I don't want to hide the painting, because I would like to ask you a question. Can you, can you, can you, okay. Yes, but the people of the Zoom just hear me. So I will ask you, if I ask you to interpret crowds from boats, I think that you will have some troubles here, because you will have difficulties to say if it is a boat or a cloud. Maybe I can do with this way in Zoom, they can see. So here, for example, it's very difficult. It's due to the fact that generally in science, we need to classify because we need to simplify the knowledge in order to organize the knowledge. But the natural objects are generally in continuum, and generally it happens. And I say that because as I work on detection, sometimes it's difficult for the algorithm to reproduce one classification that is an interpretation, a human interpretation. But I think that sometimes it is interesting that the algorithm question our own interpretations. And that's the same, for example, here. Yeah, here some of you, I think, see a woman extending his hand to a swan, and some others see a old man with a bird. And I know that for the painting, it is the objective to make illusion. And here it is the same. You can see a fruit in a plate, but I think some of you know about this painter. It is Giuseppe Arcimboldo, and that you can see here, for example, a face made of fruit. So just to see that sometimes what we see is not really, can be interpreted in many ways, and it's something important when we do detection. But I stop the painting part of my presentation. I would like to speak about geology and outcrop, interpreting outcrop along the relief. Like here it is a cliff in Salta, in Argentina. And when you are geologists, you study this cliff in order to know the geological history, the processes that occur there. And I can say to you, for example, that it is a lake deposit. And there's a cyclicity between drier weather and wetter weather, so that this cyclicity allows to deposit different kind of rock types. Depending on if there's deep water, then you have fine grains like shale, and if the deep of the water is shallow, then you have more coarser grain and then sand. And so you have cyclicity in this deposit, and little by little, time per time, you deposit several different kinds of rock types called facies or lithophile. And but to generate the cliff, you will have other processes like tectonic events, fault, but also fault like here, where you see here the shear fault, well, the shear fault, the extension fault, and the reverse fault. But it's not the only processes. You have also the erosion. I forget to say that I will speak only about normal fault. Even if you have the same stacking of lithology of the rock types, depending on the erosion, you will have different kinds of exposure of a rock, and we cannot control that. So when you are on the field and you look at the relief, you can see these kind of things. And if you are geologist, you can interpret here two faults and a stacking of different kinds of layer interpreted here by the color. But sometimes when you see the relief, you can see exactly the surface that corresponds to a geological object. For example, here you see a fault scar that corresponds to the plane along which a fault moves, slips. And here it's at a big scale. So as geologists or geomorphologists, we study the outcrops in order to better understand geological history, processes, seismic activity, but there's also a lot of applications like modeling for reservoir, for petroleum or water resources, CO2 storage, or geothermal energy, and mining, for example. And then mapping the rock types is not the task like you see here, because in 1746, it's the first geological map, but we have to wait the 19th century to really have the first major advances in geological mapping, like you see here. And we still have to wait a lot, like the beginning of the 21st century to have the digital outcrop models. It means that we have numerical representation of outcrops at outcrop scales in order to interpret detailed geological structures, and that tools that can be practical. And even if there's a lot of approaches in 3D modeling, in numerical 3D modeling that exist in the middle of the 20th century. So the first tool was the LiDAR that was used to acquire these very high resolution models. But after, with the progress of photogrammetry and the combination with UVE, then it is increasingly used for obtaining a 3D model of the topography. And so when I arrived in Marseille as a research engineer, I arrived in a small laboratory directed by Jean Romano, and he was a pioneering researcher in that scope. He was motivated to acquire a lot of digital outcrop models in order to really interpret the actual geometries of the geological structures, the actual angles, the actual shapes, because generally with photo, there's a lot of distortions, there's a lot of optical changes, and then it's more difficult. And I remember with a lot of emotions, for example, the PhD of Rémi Richer, because he interpreted during a long time the geology. I tried to help, but it was finally still a nightmare because it was really a huge task. And then I decided at that point, for the safety of students in geology, to develop approaches to semi-automatically detect the geological structures. It's not for science, it's for safety of geological students. So I will come back rapidly to the data, and I will set the problematics, and after you will see that one important thing when you develop algorithms in detection is to identify relevant descriptors. And I will show you also in the first section that there's two kinds of tasks that we will have to do, is to detect feature lines, to line linear structures, but also to segment the topography in different parts. And after I will finish in some discussion about the subject. So first, I would like to present you the data because I think you know what are these kind of data, but in the computer science point of view. In fact, you can have point clouds. Point clouds is what you see here, and it can be colored with the LiDAR intensity, a lot of properties, normal vectors, a lot of things. But one important thing is that there's no connectivity between the points. And then in some algorithms cannot be applied or not easily or are very time consuming if we apply directly on the point cloud. That's why at the beginning, most of the people work on surfaces, because surfaces, what I call meshes, that can be textured or not, and they are always normal vectors, have connected points. All the points know the neighborhood of here. It is not the case. And then it was useful for many algorithms. But generally, as the structure is very huge and very heavy, the computer structure, then we generally are obliged to decimate the point clouds, and then we lose details on the topography, so that for some application, it is not relevant. So that's why we increasingly use point cloud directly, and we try to find algorithms adapted to point clouds. And I would like just to mention that images can be still used, because if you have an equation that projection equation between your picture and the 3D geometry, then each things you are interpreted here can be mapped here. So it is still useful to do that, to apply that. And the last thing that I have to say is that digital outcome model is very different to digital elevation model, because they are in 2D and half. It means that you have just one elevation per XY point, which is not the case here. You can have multi-valued topography, and it is completely different. It is really a full 3D, what we call a full 3D object. So now I come back to the structure I have to extract. So what I would like to extract sometimes is surfaces, because it corresponds to the limit between the layers or the fault surfaces, and they are cut by the topography. So you have two cases. You have the first cases is that it crosses the topography, and then you have lines. If a surface crosses a surface, it is a line, but not always. It is the most complicated things. Because sometimes, as I said before with the fault scarp, if your object is congruent to your topography, then you have at that location a surface. And it is more complicated because sometimes it is a combination of the both. And then it is a non-manifold object in mathematics, it is the name, and it is a complicated object. There are some some properties that are not on this kind of object. That's why it is still a challenge. If we intersect a volume with a topography, we obtain, in fact, a partition of the topography with different categories, the categories of your layers, for example, or of your facies, rock types, etc. The second goal I would like to speak to you is the detection of impact crater on extraterrestrial surfaces, because what we would like to have is the diameter of each crater. The impact crater corresponds to a rock that is intersect the outcrop surface of the extraterrestrial surface. And you have then this hole, and we would like to have a diameter and the center. Why? Because it is used to estimate the age, relative age of the different surfaces. And what we would like to do in this work is to not use only the pictures of DEM, but to extract in a full, what we call a full 3D data set, a full 3D mesh, in order to have already all georeferenced. And the third goal is about seismicity, is to compute the seismic recurrence and intensity along the fault scarp. Because when you have a fault scarp, it is not one seismic event, it is several seismic events. Here, for example, in Montevideo, we see the last two earthquakes because we were there, but here, in the part here, we don't know how many earthquakes and which intensity. Fortunately, and especially in the CEREGE, you have a cosmogenic datation, and you are able to extract information on event clusters, intensity, and occurrence, but it is 1D sections and it's still a little bit expensive. So that's why it could be interesting to use the topography to map the different paleoseismic events along the fault scarp. It means to partition then the topography in several parts, exactly like the layer for the geology. So what you see is that we have two main goals: to extract line from the topography. So if you work on image, it is called the edge detection in computer science. And if it is on meshes or point, it is feature line detection. And you can have several levels of detail. If you are on surfaces, if you would like to partition the surfaces onto the dome, then it is called segmentation. Whatever the data, you have image segmentation, mesh segmentation, point segmentations, and you can see also that you can have different level of data, depending on what you would like to extract. And what about the impact criteria? It is more object detection because we would like to extract parameters of this object, but it is still made of lines, and we still use this kind of technology in order to obtain that. So now, what are the descriptors that could be revealed? Because when generally in computer science, we try to extract human, shares, a lot of things, but not rock types. So, of course, the color is a factor. There's many descriptors that are already used, but which one could be interesting for our purpose? So then we have to look at what it looks, why we see fractures, why we see stratigraphic limits. So here you can see that of course, you can see because there's a different color of rock types, but it can be also because there's a plants inside the little gutter here, and that's why you see the limit. And you have also these kind of features, the gutters, the stairs, that correspond, in fact, to something that is with curvature. So the curvature is a descriptor that could be useful for our purpose, because what we would like to extract is located where there's high curvature, where you have a gutter. For the crater impact, it is the same, because you see that here you have a ring and it is silent, and then you have also high curvature. On the contrary, along the podcast, there's not a lot of curvature, it is flat. And what we think about is to say that as for the cosmogenic behavior, when the rock is on exposure, then it is impacted by the weather, and then you can have a dissolution, you can changes in the roughness, for example, or in the texture. It means the patterns of the color, not the color in itself, but the patterns. And then that's why we would like to work on texture and on roughness. So what about the curvature? So a little bit of mathematics, I'm sorry. A curvature, it corresponds, to be simple, it corresponds to the inverse of the osculator circle here. If you try you have a curve here, and if you try to draw a circle, then the radius, the inverse of the radius corresponds to the curvature. So the more you are like that, the more it's a curve. So you have a high curvature, and the more it's flat, then you have low curvature. But mathematically, it corresponds to a second derivative of the position of the point along the line. And it's very important. You have to remember that in the following. What about the surface? Because the surface is not a line. In fact, what you can do is that you can draw a lot of lines along your surface, and there's one line for which you will have the maximum curvature and one the minimum curvature. And it is shown that they are perpendicular. And after, we can also compute the mean curvature that corresponds to the mean of the curvature and the Gaussian curvature that corresponds to the product of the curvature, of the mean and max curvature. And you can see here, for example, that the mean curvature seems to be a good descriptor of gutter. You agree with me? Yes? I hope so. The Gaussian is not so good. You see that it's not a good message. So that's why we think that the mean curvature can be a good descriptor. And it is also interesting, it's very interesting this part, I think, because whatever the complexity of your surface, you can have really complex surface, but there's only, at a point, there's only 8 situations, the 8 that you have here. There's nothing else, okay? Because here is not possible, mathematically, okay? So that's very interesting to say that a surface can be summarized by 8 features. You have also to retain that. About the roughness, there's many ways to measure the roughness of a surface, but as I made a PhD in geostatistics, I know about the computation of fractal dimensions using a variogram, which is a geostatistical tool. What is a variogram? You have the question. It is the average of the difference of variability along your surface. Okay? And it is shown, je crois que j'ai pas branché mon ordi. It is shown, c'est pas ça que je voulais dire. It is shown that if you compute the variogram and you compute it on a topographic surface, it follows a power law. And that the component here is linked with the fractal dimension. And if you have a surface, then you are in the 3D space, and the fractal dimensions is linked with this exponent by this equation. So in 2D, because it's easier in 2D, if you are in 2D, then the dimension, fractal dimension is computed like that. And alpha, for example, when it's high, it means that it is smooth. The line is smooth and it's close to a straight line. If it is close to 0, it means that, in fact, it covers the 2D space almost. You see here that it almost covers part of the surface. And it is very robust. It's characterization of the roughness. So I just would like to say that generally, fractal dimension is used to study autosimilarity. But here is not the case. I don't mind about snowflakes, and I don't mind about autosimilarity of objects. I mind about the roughness of a surface. Okay. The next one, the last, is the texture analysis. And there's a computer operator that is very used even in neural networks that allow to characterize how locally your level of gray vary in a picture. Now, it's very simple, you will see. You have here the level of gray between 0 and 255, and you compute the difference between the center pixel and the neighborhood. Then you have negative value and positive value. If the value is negative, strictly negative, then you put 0. If it's positive or null, then you put 1. Then it's a way to binarize, it's a binary number, to binarize the way the variability is around the pixel. So it's very clever. I like this idea. And after, as it is a binary number, you can compute by the power of 2 the final number, and it is your LBP operator. And you can see that it can highlight features on a picture. So now, how to reveal edges and feature lines with all of these fields. I just select contributions because I work a lot on this topic, and I think even maybe I was not too selective. I hope so. The first project is the first one I launched when I arrived in Marseille, and with the PhD of Dimitri Kudelski to extract fractal traces and stratigraphic traces from triangulated meshes. After I adapt with colleagues this algorithm to detect impact crater. And I would like to finish by the notion that I like is to have a new notion of edges using skewness. Skewness is a parametric, statistical parameter. So the first one is this one. I try to extract the line from triangulated meshes, and I would like to use curvature. And what I see is that, in fact, what I would like to detect corresponds to the line of maximum of curvature. It is the corner of the stairs or the gutter here, maximum curvature. And as I said, it is feature line detection. And it is based on the computation of curvature. But as I said, it is based on derivative. And generally, the problem when you try to apply conventional techniques is that the outcrops are very erratic. There's a lot of roughness, and derivative doesn't like that. really not. So that's why it's not stable, and many approaches fail to have continuous interpretations because there's a kind of holes each time there's some noise or intersection between gutter. So we think about what I said before is that, in fact, we can summarize locally any surfaces by 8 features. And that the feature we would like to extract correspond to this line. It means that we have just to check where the mean curvature is positive. So it is what we did. We check everywhere on the surface where it is positive. We create a binary region. Blue is where you are this kind of features, and white is where there's not. And then what we do, we skeletize, we compute the skeleton, it means the middle lines of this region, in order to have the feature line. And then after, we can optimize the position in order to be sure that it is really in the middle of the gutter. And we can also filter. And as you see, it really increased the continuity of the extracted lines. And I can show you in example, we were obliged it's still linked with geology, but we apply on a classical object for comparison in computer science. And you can see here that previous approaches that are there fail in continuity, and that we succeed in having continuous lines. And we apply there these approaches on outcrops. So we succeed to have continuous lines, but it was still not satisfying. But the surprise is that when there's some people from biology who were interested to apply it, and it better work on brain because brain are smoother than outcrops. So after we try to adapt what we did for astronomical applications, so for crater detection. So what we think is to say, in fact, it's just the contrary. Here we don't want to have gutter, but to have ridge. So we select this and we try to extract. And it's true that if I show you the curvature, the mean curvature, you can see the impact crater. But if I apply just like that, it is a little bit difficult to know where are the craters. And filtering is still difficult. So it's not a good idea. So what we try to do is first, after to think about the pit, to try to check for the center of the craters. But still here, it was not satisfying because when we apply, we were strongly dependent on the smoothness locally of the crater impact here to find this pit. And we have to pass 2 times on the mesh in order to have a different level of detail. So it was not satisfying. And so what we think is to use the both, to use the pit and the borders, and it worked better. So after that, we would like to have an index of circularity in order to check which detected object could be really a crater, an impact crater or not. So this is the index. So it checks if it is really circular or various shape. And it is made to facilitate human shape because it is very important when you detect things automatically. Generally, you have to correct because generally there's still some errors. And it is great to have some tools in order to be able to still have indication about what could be wrong. And you can see here, it's very fast on meshes. And we have something like, I don't write it, but something that more than 80% of accuracy. So it was a good result. And that's why after we try to integrate during a PhD of Nicole Christophe, it was another project, to integrate the curvature inside neural networks in order to boost the accuracy and the efficiency of the neural networks. So as you certainly know, neural networks belong to artificial intelligence, and you have to train first. You give site location where there's craters, but also where there's not, in order for the neural network to learn where there's no crater. And there's a training phase. And after, when you train a lot on your data set, you give a new data to process, and then he succeeds to give you the answer. And what we do, we add information in the filters. There's a lot of filters in our networks. We add information about curvature, and it really enhances the results. And finally, I would like to speak about the thing I think it's beautiful, but that's my opinion. It's the fundamental idea of what is an edge. Like it is said in Papari, an edge, you can see that as a differential issue. It means that you see an edge where there's a big changes of value in level of gray. It means that you have a huge gradient. So it is a derivative view of an edge, okay? But you have also, it is not really known, it is not known a lot, this part, the statistical part. It is also possible to discriminate an edge, to compare, to separate a neighborhood in two, and to check if some statistics are similar or not. But the problem is that the two approaches have some issue, feedback, drawbacks. The interest here is that it's fast, but it's not robust to noise. It's not suitable for extracting pattern field object, like, for example, this kind of things. You will have any lines. And here it's more convenient for extracting pattern field objects. It's robust to noise, but it's very slow because you have to check all the orientation of the separation of the neighborhood. So I was thinking to another idea is to use the skewness. The skewness measure the symmetry of your histogram. So this is the formula, and depending on the sign of this parametric, the statistical parameter, you can know if you are symmetric or not. And if you are on an edge, there's half of a neighborhood that is on a part and half on a part. Then you are particularly symmetric generally if you are really on half. So generally you are on an edge when you are close to zero. And that's very interesting because then we can use the skewness as the edge detector, except for the corner, because of course where there's corner, it is not the case. You don't have half of the color that are on there's more, for example, here white pixels. So I test on classical example for pattern object recognition, and you see, for example, here that you have wrong corner. It's because of what I said. But we can optimize after in order to fit the real corner. And I applied also on geological image, and I do exactly with the same idea of Dimitri Kevdesky. It means that instead of directly try to fit the optimality, you just at the beginning try to select candidates, and after you select the optimal candidate. And it is what we do in recruitment. It's a so I will finish with extracting structure through segmentation. So I also selected 3 projects. So the first was to extract plane detection from 3D point clouds, to do facious mapping, and to detect earthquakes. So the first is to detect fracture planes. So for example, here you see an outcrop and you have a fracture here, for example, fracture plane that I showed before. And there's already a lot of algorithms that exist, but they extract patches. It means that, for example, here, we can imagine that this part is belong to the same fracture as this one, but for this algorithm, it will be two different fractures. And then for the statistics on fractures, it will change. So that's why I would like to see if we cannot add clustering processing in order to see if it could have continuity between the extracted patches. What I see also is that generally when you extract data from outcrops, you know things. You do plunge measurements, you know a lot of things about your outcrops already. So generally you have family of fractures, so you can use this information in order to select what you want and not to select everything. So what I did, I use in fact the fact that if the local normal of the topography is collinear to the normal of the fracture plane we would like to extract, then it belongs to a fracture plane. And then I use just scalar product to use that. I give a threshold and I select all the points that satisfy this threshold. But still, there's a lot of points. If I do that, there's a lot of points, and all are not fractures. And sometimes you have just small patches, and it's certainly not a fracture. So what I use is a clustering strategy. So I use canopy strategy, which is a rough clustering algorithm in order to deal with big data. And after, from this rough clustering, I apply hierarchical ascendant clustering. So I show you in pictures. So this is the first canopy. I had with some parameter here of tolerance. And after, I apply the clustering algorithm. And what I do is that I try to merge features that are aligned in the same direction. I try to minimize the change of normal vectors, and I try to keep same density, to not have big hole inside the data points. And so if I do that from the canopies, I obtain less clusters, and I also remove all point clouds that are inferior to a certain number. And among that, I built a 3D model, and a geologist, a student, check what was extracted. And in fact, there's 60% of well interpreted, and there's 13 splitted and 27 merged. After with this model, we compare the fracture density measured in the model compared to one skyline measured on the field. And what we see is that at the beginning, so we begin from this fault to that direction, so it is 0 and this way. And we see that at the beginning, it was really great, and suddenly we lose some fractures. And it is because here, the fractures are well expressed by the planes, and not here. It becomes lines. And that's why we miss some planes. It's because it's just lines, and we don't extract lines. And we apply, I forget to say that we apply this on the Chury Comet kernel in order to extract also fracture, and we try to make the same models. And what I would like to do after, as I said, is to extract facies from outcrop data. So it was the project with the PhD of Eduardo Romers de Oliveira. We have a case study in Salta in Argentina, and we would like from outcrop data to have facies. So what we do, we work with the Unipampa team, who developed an algorithm based on CNN, and that is very clever. I like very much the idea, is that you interpret the pictures, you apply CNN on all the photos that allow you to build this photogrammetric object. You build mask, and after, due to the overlap, you rebuild each part of the outcrops. And what is important is that at that point, you have selection. Because if you don't have enough overlap, the algorithm of photogrammetry will not reproduce your point. Oui, j'ai oublié de brancher mon ordinateur avec le problème technique. Je vais être obligée de le brancher. Sorry. So we apply it, and we also work a lot on optimizing the algorithm and to minimize the human interpretation. So we optimize the workflow parameters, and we do that what we call data augmentation. It means to use the same pictures, but to just keep part of the pictures in order to add variability in the data set. And we also use two kinds of photo, the raw data and the equalized images, in order to have different luminosity in the pictures, to train the neural network to see something differently. It's a little bit what I said at the beginning, you know. And also, when we apply that, we reduce the number of edges, also exactly for the reason I said between the cloud and the boat, is that there's some things here in the first classification that cannot be distinguishable at the outcrop scale. And so due to that, we obtain good results, and we have more than 80% of accuracy on the photos. But as I said, the result on the point cloud is better because there's a selection. It means that bad interpretation is less expressed. But we still have to measure that because it's not easy to interpret directly on the outcrops. That's why we didn't do it for the moment. But we would like to do it in order to measure the final accuracy that should be better than this one. And the last, but not the least, to try to detect paleo earthquake. So I apply on two case study. One, because we see with human eyes some seismic events because we know they exist. And one, we don't know, but we have some data from analysis, geochemistry analysis. So what I do for this part, I develop a tool with a student from the point cloud to compute medium plane, to compute the residual between the medium plane that cross the fault scarp and each point, in order to have here the residual, the local roughness, in fact, the local variability. After I put all the points here of the point class inside a grid object. So here in the blue, you have several points, here several points. And I compute a variogram in order to compute the famous alpha components that correspond to my roughness. If it is small, it is smooth. It is rough. If it is high, it is smooth. Okay? And so you see that you can have different kinds of values. And after, I can compute also an average of the value, along the profile. And I check if it was really a power law for each variogram. And for the texture, I apply also texture processing with local binary pattern. I do the same, compute the middle plane, I build the grid. But here I have several points in each cell. So what I do, I have several level of gray value inside each cell because I have several points. And I apply an average. I think we could do better, but for the moment it is the case. And you can see that it highlights, the LBP pattern highlights very well the difference of color here and of patterns here. So I apply on the two datasets. The first one is just to see the link between the roughness and the event, because we know that there's two events here and here. So we see that the LBP see well this event, and even we can imagine that it could be an event here because it follows the same trend and it's logical because when you move from the topography, you follow the same trend. And I compare with alpha, some parts with alpha computation in order to see which is the optimal resolution to compute the alpha components. And I see that, for example, here, it should be 7 centimeters because we see really the difference of roughness here and compared to what we have here. And we see also some variability here, and especially when we do the profiles. So now I apply on row capture rule because we have information close along the outcrop, and we know some events like this one and this one from this study. I know that there's new results, but I didn't update in the presentation. So we would like to apply close to this data our approach. And I begin with one resolution. And we see that we have, for the alpha value, an event close to 4 meters. That is one event that has been seen. But we have also something between 2 meters or 1.5. We have also 6 meters as it was found in a previous study. And it's not really clear at 7. At that scale. We see here peaks, but it's not really visible. But we see here clearly something, and we see a little bit variability here. And it is when we use the LBP with a low, very high higher resolution, you can see here that that's what I said, that we see something, but at the beginning, I think you didn't know. If I say to you, tell me where are I cannot move. Where are the seismic events? You cannot say that. But here you see that once you have seen that, it's like Archibald painting. You see where it is. Because you see, I don't know if you see because maybe you are too far away, but what you will see here, it's something that we see on the data really, but very teeny variability. So that's interesting. And we see also this event at 7 meters. So it's very, and 1 and 2 meters. So it's really encouraging. But as I study the roughness, it is also depending on the rock types. And as I see that on the curve of calcium composition, there's variability, I wonder if there's no effect of lithology. Is there some variabilities or not? Because the geochemistry takes into account that, but not me. And finally, we begin to develop a clustering algorithm in order to have a mapping of what we see with the LBP and the alpha. But the problem is that we have to use different resolution in order to better use the alpha and the LBP together. So that's something that we have still to enhance. So for the discussion, it is very short, so don't be tired. I just would like to mention that more and more when I do a presentation in Congress, neural network is ubiquitous approaches like there's only this technique that exists. It's even almost systematic for solving a problem. So it's true that it gives good results for certain applications, and I agree with that. I use it, no problem. But when you have complex objects, few data, and you require expertise for interpretation, it is more a difficult task for a neural network, even if we compensate with new approaches, active learning, like data augmentations and a lot of other things. But I also would like to say that a neural network is energy intensive. And sometimes people use that for inverting a matrix, which is something that we know how to do it. I mean, we don't need. And more in computer science, the new domain of research is to develop frugal algorithms and to more use sometimes the neural network for small tasks, subtasks, instead of the, the rough task which needs a lot of computer energy. And also, one challenge, as I said, is to extract this kind of ugly shapes. That is a combination of surface and lines. There's I reviewed a PhD thesis recently that tried to do that from Stefano Casiraghi, and Italian. I'm sorry for the Italian accent. And it was very interesting, but there's still a lot of challenges. And for descriptor analysis, in fact, I work recently with the laboratory of mathematics in Marseille, and they develop approaches based on topography and Earth. It is linked to variography, to fractal dimension, and they develop techniques in order to better characterize the roughness, and that is more robust. So I would like to apply that. And also, we would like to apply hyperspectral data, because hyperspectral is what a human don't see. But what we would like to do, and we try here in Bardus-Lang in 2024, because we would like to scan a cliff, but with the camera horizontally equipped in a UV. And it's not so easy, because generally it is made so that the camera is this way, with to the bottom. And it's not just a rotation of 90 degrees, because you have a lot of post-processings that are depending on that, and that you have more distortion in that way. The UV move more in that way. So it's there's a lot of distortion, but I can show you some first results on the Bardus-Lang. This is, I think, the part that we see here. And you see that it highlights some blue colors here that seems to have a cyclicity, and it seems to be linked to pedogenetic facies. And then it shows that it can highlight things that we cannot see with human eyes. So it is very interesting. And it is more and more used to merge several kinds of data: hyperspectral, LiDAR data, photogrammetric data, and in a cloud that is called an hypercloud. That's really the trend, actually. And also, for the hyperspectral cliff acquisition, we, at that time, Lorenzo D'Angelo, a Master 2 student, spent his training period in Salta and also in Brazil in order to enhance the protocol in order to obtain the hyperspectral data from a cliff and from a UV acquisition type. And it seems that they try to hyperspectralize themselves here, but like a slump, but I don't know if it has an interest for science. I would like to, as I said, no one is in Iceland, and I'm not. And so this work was not possible without all these persons. And so I would like to thank them to work with me and to still work with me. And also I would like to thank all the projects and the sponsoring of this project to develop this algorithm. Thank you for your attention. I hope it was not too long, because I lose the dimension and it perturbates myself.
Thank you very much. So, are there some questions?
Oui, yes.
I think 8 last weeks
Mhm.
and I think Alex the geomorphon.
Geomorphon, what is a geomorphon?
Like this time, they have let's say, one of the modern ways to separate the DL.
Mhm.
And one way, we use this.
Yes, I think.
Find some geological structure like the marine earth. If that's why they care about it.
Maybe the fact is that it just select the kind of shape, but you can have a gutter that can be more or less, spiky. So there's no quantization in that selection because it's only the sign. But for example, in the detection in the when we use it for the neural network, we have different pressure in order to really separate spike from something more smooth. We would say even if it is the shape of a riddle, for example, for the ring. So and also we use that because with these approaches we try to also extract a kind of relative age of impact crater, depending on because old crater is smoother than a recent crater. So we try to use the value of the curvature, not only the sign, but the value of the curvature to do that. And it's possible to extract, to magnify information using that. Really, really. Even for, I would say, even for just interpretation. At the beginning, when we didn't apply the algorithm to extract the fracture plane on the Chury comet, we compute the mean curvature in order to highlight the gutter. Because if you do that, like, you see here, it's just beautiful. You see really, it highlights if you see just the topography at the beginning, I don't know where it is. Well, here, and especially for the small one, I mean, it's, well, there's a little shift, I know.
Thank you. Another question? No? Lunch?
Yes. And so what is your answer for the cloud? You think it's a boat or a cloud? I ask a question. I think it begins to be a boat here. Or here. It depends. So thank you for your attention and hope you like this works. And that I was not too long.
No, thank you very much.